So Jordan Jensen is a comedian and podcaster, I guess. And she is one of the most talented comedians on the scene. She's really good. One of my personal favorites. And she has a podcast called RIP Jordan Jensen, where she has different guests on. It's not really a comedy podcast. It's more philosophy and talking about different subjects like death and depression and that sort of thing. So it can be a pretty interesting watch sometimes. It's still relatively niche, but I enjoy it because I'm a follower of Jordan Jensen's. And she is an interesting character because she has kind of oscillated back and forth in the whole right-wing comedy direction. She was doing a lot of jokes about trans people for a while, a lot of misogynist jokes for a while, even though she is also a woman. That was just kind of her angle. And so I've been following her for a while, and despite the fact that she has a little bit of a right-wing lean, I've always liked her, and I've always still given her the benefit of the doubt, because even when I don't love the commentary or I don't feel like it's particularly well informed, it always comes from a very personal place, more so than like a place of political assertions or analysis. So to me, it slides a little bit more. And I think she's really good, and she's an honest person. So even when she says things that can be a little bit abhorrent, it doesn't come off as cheeky or sort of gloating as other right-wing comedians. And on top of that, it seems like recently she's sort of had a change of heart. She's gone in a different direction. Something about the election and the vibe of the Trump campaign during the election seems to have sent her a little bit more in a center-left direction, where for a while she was pretty regularly saying things that were pretty recognizable right-wing talking points and just playing to that sort of crowd. In some cases saying some pretty offensive things. But I was always curious to see what was going to happen with her, and if she was going to keep going in this right-wing direction, if it was something that she like really, really believed in, or if it was more of like just something that she was playing around with. And it seems to have been the latter, where it seems like she's making a little bit of a pivot in a left-wing direction, which I appreciate. I don't think that she's going to go really to the left, but it's nice to see that she is not fully embracing the right-wing audience and the right-wing just general vibe to her comedy, and is instead focusing on the more personal aspect of it and bringing in a little bit more of a center-left type of analysis to her comedy and to her podcasting in general. So that's just a little bit of a relief for me personally to see, because I'm a fan of hers, and I wouldn't have been able to keep supporting her if she were to keep traveling further and further in the right-wing direction. So we'll see what happens from here. But on her podcast recently, on RIP Jordan Jensen, she had the guest Jon Lovett, who is one of the Pod Save America guys. And I don't know much about this guy. I've seen some clips of him here and there. I'm definitely aware of him, and I'm aware of Pod Save America. I've seen a few clips of theirs, and I'm familiar with their work. I'm not that curious about this person, to be perfectly honest with you. I know that he used to be a speechwriter for Hillary Clinton. So this is a guy who has existed in the political world, and especially on the liberal Democratic side, let alone for Hillary Clinton. And I think he said one other person that he was writing speeches for, maybe Obama. And so not only is he sort of in the Democratic politics world, but he is also a comedian and has become more of a public figure and commentator in the past few years, ever since Pod Save America started. If you're unfamiliar with Pod Save America, it's a pretty liberal podcast. I believe it started as sort of a resistance liberals kind of thing. against Trump during the first Trump administration, then kept going through the Biden administration. And so throughout this, you see, in my view of the Pod Save America, which is not, I haven't followed them closely, but they do sort of pop up in the discourse every now and then. And from what I've seen, I don't think that there's been a lot of evolution or much self-scrutinizing of their beliefs, which I think is necessary given the loss of the liberal candidate in this past election. And everybody has their different ideas of why that is. And Pod Save America famously, since the election, had on some advisors from Kamala Harris's campaign to explain what went wrong, how she lost, what the campaign was doing with its time up until the election, that sort of thing. And this received widespread backlash. People hated this interview because what you saw from these Kamala Harris advisors was an inability to grapple with their failures in messaging, their failures to present Kamala Harris in a way that was appealing to the base. And there's just this insistence on chasing right-wing voters based on data that this entire election was going to come down to these swing voters that were either going to go for Trump or go for Kamala. I don't know. Maybe I voted for Obama. Maybe I voted for Trump. Then I voted for Biden. I just don't know who I'm going to vote for. And there's some truth to that. There is a contingent of voters that you have to reach that are a little bit more moderate, especially when you're talking about Pennsylvania, which is one of the most important states in the past 3 elections, because you've got fracking there, you've got unions there that are associated with fracking, and so you can't necessarily win over those demographics with like straight left-wing politics. You have to play to the center a little bit. Fracking is the perfect example of this. Both Biden and Kamala Harris had to back off of anti-fracking positions in order to try to appeal to Pennsylvania. I guess it worked for Biden and it has not worked for Kamala Harris. And in their analysis of this election after it happened, there's a failure to recognize that the determining factor was actually not these swing voters that could have gone either way. It was the fact that the Democrats have a sizable base that consistently wins elections, at least the popular vote, and that base absolutely did not show up for this election. They just did not. They were not excited about Kamala Harris. The whole fiasco of Biden dropping out, being replaced with Kamala, then followed up by Kamala's failure to mount a popular platform of policies, resulted in just a complete flatlining of support from the base of Democrats. So in literally chasing Republicans, you had people on the ground knocking on doors for Kamala Harris who were saying that they were told to go knock on doors of Republicans in places like North Carolina. And, we're not talking about going after swing voters and sort of center, I don't know. We're talking about going after Republicans. This was the strategy of the Kamala Harris campaign. Maybe not 100%, but in large part. And it seems very clear that they wasted a lot of resources being organizers, resources being volunteers, resources being money. They wasted it because they were chasing the wrong voters, and none of the voters that they needed showed up. And so you have this cataclysmic loss where Democrats even lost the popular vote to one of the least popular presidents in modern history. And so Pod Save America, even though they can be critical of Democrats, and nobody is a monolith, some of them are worse than others. There's a guy, Jon Favreau, on Pod Save America who's constantly on Twitter arguing with leftists and whoever else, and that guy's just pretty insufferable. But both from Pod Save America and from these advisors of Kamala Harris, what you see is this it's like a denial of reality, or it's just something where they're not meeting the moment. And whatever it is that their analysis is, whatever it is that's going on in their brain about how all this politics stuff works and what's the strategy that needs to be employed, they just seem like they're missing a huge part of it. And this interview that Jon Lovett did with Jordan Jensen is kind of evidence of that to me. He's a pleasant guy. It's a nice interview. It's a fun interview. They're just talking. It's not a serious interview. She's not, grilling him or trying to get answers out of him. They're just talking back and forth about politics. And it really is an example, I think, of how milquetoast liberals like him and like Pod Save America are just not up for what we're up against. And their worldview, their level of analysis is just not meeting the moment. And me, as a person who's never followed this Jon Lovett guy, I didn't know that much about him. I went into this curious, wanting to know what he had to say, interested in the fact, look, it's good that Jordan Jensen, being someone who's flirted with right-wing politics, is friends with this guy, Jon Lovett, and is having him on her podcast, and they're getting along well. And that's a positive sign. It's good. But, all of these right-wing comics probably need more liberal friends, at least liberal, if not leftist friends, that are also good communicators that can help them understand the actual cores of these issues and where it actually matters. And that's why I appreciate Jordan Jensen, because it seems like she's seeking that understanding. She wants to figure it out. And that's what I like about comedians. I like comedians who are trying to figure things out, not comedians who are trying to assert their dominant masculine worldview. I like comedians who are actively thinking about things and making jokes about it as they go. But in this interview, I have to say that I was really just impressed by how unimpressed I was with this guy. I mean, that's a silly thing to say, but you'll see what I'm saying. So I'll start with this first clip, and I'm gonna put some clips actually in this podcast. I haven't done that yet, but I'm gonna try it. And it takes more effort. It takes a little bit more labor. So if you guys like this and you want more clips in the podcast, a good way to let me know that would be to donate with the super thanks down below, or maybe become a member, or just let me know in the comments that you like it. If you like this format and you want me to do it more, let me know, because it does take some extra effort, but I know that people like clips and videos, so we'll see how this goes. But here's this first one. This is just a little anecdote that he shares that I think is very telling.
I was on like a fancy trip once as a plus one, and there was a billionaire there, and the billionaire opened up his suitcase, and he looked in his suitcase and he went like this, and I realized he was counting underwear, and I was like, or socks or something, and I was like, wow, no matter what you do, no matter how far you've come, no matter what your life is, we all have to open up our suitcase and make sure we have enough, and just count the number of underwears and socks we have left, this is like when you go to bed and you count the number of hours of sleep you're going to get. We all use our hand to do it. None of us do the math in our head. Like there's no one to do that for you.
So I mean, I have to say that has to be one of the least profound observations I have ever heard from any commentator. And let's really just break this down a little bit. So this guy is on a fancy trip. He said he's on a fancy trip, some kind of cruise or something like that. Who the fuck knows? Who even knows what's going on there? Why he was on this trip? Where he was going? Who he was on this trip with? Doesn't say anything about that. He kind of just does this weird little humble brag that this was a fancy trip and there were fancy people there. And he says there was a billionaire there that was looking in his suitcase, and he's counting his socks, and that causes Jon Lovett to say, wow, this guy's just like the rest of it. He's just a normal guy. And man, I was really struck by how empty that is. And it really, I think, gets to the core of why liberals are not up to the fight in this moment. Because this guy's talking about a billionaire with a B. So not to mention the fact that he is, for some reason, on a trip with this guy. So that already is like, talk about the elites. That's exactly what people are referring to. So And he's not saying that he's around people like this all the time. He sounds rather impressed that there was a billionaire on this trip with him. So, okay, fair enough. But this observation that this guy's looking at his suitcase and he's counting his underwear, just like all the rest of us do. And to him, that leads him to the conclusion that being a billionaire is essentially just normal life with billions of dollars. That's kind of the core of his conclusion here, of his observation. And I am really just floored at the lack of understanding of like what a billionaire is, what the implications of being a billionaire is, and what the implications are of being in the same room as a billionaire, to the point where you can have a casual conversation. You guys are on the same trip. That alone has, political implications that could be discussed at length. But the fact that this little moment of mundanity that he sees from this person is enough to kind of convince him that like, oh, this is just a normal guy who's just achieved a lot. And for somebody who goes on later in this same podcast to talk about how Elon Musk bought influence with the government, bought Twitter, which allowed him to have an outsized influence on the culture, and that's bad. Because he's a billionaire, all of these things are possible because he's a billionaire. And yet, in this moment where he's literally in close quarters with a billionaire, who knows which one or to what extent, but a billionaire. And the best you can sort of pull out of that situation is that this guy has to pack his suitcase just like me. And you can't really stretch yourself to think about the fact that like maybe that's actually not representative of what a billionaire is. Maybe that guy and that moment in that guy's life is actually an outlier. Like to think that billionaires, he says something about like there's no one there to help you with that, is the biggest crock of shit I've ever heard. You're telling me you don't think billionaires have people to pack their luggage for them and unpack their luggage for them and set up their rooms wherever they go? I mean, of course all that shit is taken care of. That's what being a billionaire is. A billionaire spends more money paying people to take care of all of those little chores, pretty much every chore you could imagine. They spend more money than me and this guy, Jon Lovett, make combined in a year just on that, and they don't even notice that it's gone because they're too busy buying political influence and going on fancy trips. That's what a billionaire is. And yet this guy, because he's in this situation and in this room, he's not grasping the fact that like what you're witnessing is kind of the pinnacle of privilege defined. And okay, if you're seeing sort of a humble moment from this billionaire, whoever it might have been, and that was kind of touching to you, fine. But the idea that softens you to what a billionaire is and just how much raw power a billionaire has is absurd. And that's exactly the kind of weak analysis that has allowed billionaires to run roughshod not only just over our culture in general, over the Republican Party, which openly loves billionaires, but over the Democratic Party too. The Democrats have been bought out by various billionaires forever. And guys like this are kind of, this is harsh, but they're paid to not notice that. They're paid to not notice that. I mean, this is a guy who worked for Hillary Clinton. And he's not connecting that to the fact that he's in the same room with a billionaire, to the fact that he now goes on a podcast every day talking about how the left was the problem in this election, and that the demands of the left and the demands of people like the uncommitted voters are what caused things to go wrong for Kamala Harris, and not the fact that Kamala Harris was schmoozing with and trying to impress the same people that you were on this fancy cruise with because of Hillary Clinton, presumably, right? Like the people Kamala Harris was trying to cozy up to are the same people that Hillary Clinton was always cozying up to. And that's why people hate Democrats. This is why people hate liberals, because they are not able to see what is right in front of their face. Liberals are insanely talented at not grasping what is right in front of their face. And that's what leads me to this next clip where he talks a little bit about Elon Musk's Nazi salute. Let's check this out.
And so, like, okay, let's say he did it. What does that mean? It means he has right-wing views. It means he doesn't understand why the Nazis are so despicable. It means he feels like no one can stop him and he doesn't have to listen to anybody. I kind of already know that. You know, it's like I already know he's going to do whatever he wants and he has all this power that he shouldn't have. Like, okay, so then what? Like, and then the other option is that it really was just a kind of like weird arm gesture from an excited man who's not used to being so beloved by a crowd and was a bit like overtaken, whatever. Like, I don't care either way. It's like, hey, like, Trump is trying to deport a lot of people. He just pardoned a bunch of violent criminals for attacking police officers when his own vice president promised not to do that.
Yeah.
Said he wasn't going to do it.
Yeah.
Said, no, obviously he's not going to pardon violent people.
Yeah.
And then he did it. And that's a big deal, and people really hate it.
So that really irritated me. I was not planning to make a podcast about this guy. I was just watching this episode for fun. I had no intentions of talking about this, but I just could not believe how impotent that is of a take on Elon Musk's literal Nazi salute. He says that there's two options. Either Elon Musk is just kind of a right-wing guy, and he thinks, Nazis aren't that bad, and, he's just playing around, and no one can stop him. Or it was a weird, awkward hand gesture, blah, blah, blah. And either way, what we should focus on is the policy of Trump, the bad policies of Trump, the fact that he is not following through on certain things that he said he would or wouldn't do, and that people dislike some of this policy or a lot of this policy that he's coming out of the gate with. And I'll give him credit. That's a fair point to say, to focus on the policy. Except there's a third option when it comes to Elon Musk's Nazi salute that just totally blows by this guy. And that is that Elon Musk did a Nazi salute because he's a full-blown Nazi. And he believes in that shit. That's why he did it. It's right there. It's so obvious. He did that shit on national TV. That is one of the most enthusiastic Nazi salutes I've ever seen in my life. So to me, the obvious conclusion, and to a lot of people out there who are watching their TVs and are afraid of the future of this nation, that's a pretty obvious Nazi salute. We don't really need to water that down with nuance, right? And in fact, it's very unhelpful to do so. And the fact that this guy says in the same breath that Elon Musk's Nazi salute, it's either this or that, whatever, but the important thing is that Trump is carrying out mass deportations. Trump pardoned the January 6th rioters. And he doesn't see the connection between those two things. That's what's mind-blowing to me. He does not see those as connected. He sees them as separate. We shouldn't be focusing on Elon Musk making a weird gesture because we should be focusing on this policy of Trump's that's bad. And he can't see that those are literally one and the same. Elon Musk doing a Nazi salute on national TV is the same as Donald Trump doing mass deportations on day one. It's the same ideology. That's the problem. What we are looking at is full-blown fascism. And you can see that so clearly when you juxtapose the images of Elon Musk doing the Nazi salute with the information of what Trump is doing with his first days in office. We are seeing actual fascism in America. But the problem with liberals like this, and like the guys on Pod Save America, and like plenty of others, pretty much every Democratic lawmaker, the problem with them is that they can't call it what it is. They can't look at that. This dude is incapable financially, professionally, and probably personally on some level of looking at that and saying, what we are dealing with is full-blown, fully empowered fascism in America. And the reason they can't acknowledge that is because that would also require them to acknowledge that fascism has come to power in America because of a complete failure of liberals and liberalism to stop it. The adults in the room, the ones who are supposed to be the most sensible and oh, we elect Joe Biden, he's a centrist and he can lead our country, and all of these right-wingers who are saying Joe Biden is brain melting, they're just spreading misinformation, and we just need to get through this. And of course Biden's going to run again because he's doing such a great job as president. Why would we want anybody else to run? Why would we want to have a primary? That doesn't make sense. Leftists criticizing that complete lack of strategy and coherence, they don't make any sense. They're just whining. They're just crying. This is the Pod Save America brand. And it's just completely insufficient. It's insufficient because acknowledging that what we're dealing with is full-blown fascism, which is how Jordan Jensen starts that, by the way. She starts that part of the conversation by acknowledging that what we were seeing is a full-blown Nazi salute. And then here comes the nuance understander to come and sort of say, well, hey, let's calm down. Either what we were seeing is sort of just a funny little silly Nazi salute, or just a funny little silly autism quirk. But what we should really focus on is Trump and mass deportation. And that's true. That is what we should focus on. But not being able to draw that connection between a Nazi salute from the most powerful person in the world, arguably more powerful than Trump because of how much leverage he has over Trump, and the policies that Trump is going for on day one. It's an abdication of responsibility. It's an abdication of your responsibility as a political commentator to tell people accurately what they're looking at. And in the name of nuance and in the name of rationality, you are trying to obscure once again that what we are looking at is real fascism. And the reason they can't acknowledge that is because acknowledging that what we are dealing with now with Trump is real fascism would be to acknowledge that we have to do something different to combat that. To admit that what Trump is real fascism is to admit that the liberal order in America is not up to this challenge, and that we need to do something much more radical in order to combat that. And guys like this exist to prevent people from coming to conclusions like that. Guys like this exist to continually point people back to the liberal order and politics as usual, and to promise us that this is what's going to get us through, and that the only way to beat Trump is with liberalism. And to admit that Trump is what he is would be to admit that liberals are inherently incapable of fighting that. So, I don't know. Pod save us. Pod save us all.